Welcome back to Continuing the Conversation, where we bring you authentic AI insights and cut through the noise. Here's something that might surprise you. Most people think the key to getting great results from AI is the perfect prompt. Nail the magic words and boom, brilliance. But here's the truth no one's saying out loud. 80% of effective AI work happens before you ever hit send. It's all about something called context management. And if you don't know what that means, you're not alone. But I promise it's the difference between AI that actually helps you and AI that completely misses the mark. I'm your host, Chelene Martin, AI enthusiast, business strategist, and co-founder of Revenue Pulse Advisors. Joining me today is my friend Rob, the CEO of CharmIQ, and someone who's been sounding the alarm on this for years. Rob, let's just say this is not another how to write a better prompt conversation, is it? All right, well, let's start at the beginning because I don't think most people even know what context means when we talk about AI. So, Rob, what is context in this space and why is it the foundation for everything that follows? I'm interested to hear your thoughts.
Thank you, Chelene. Well, I'm actually taken a little aback because you said I've been talking about this for years, and it has been years. Holy moly, where does time go?
Yeah.
So context is so important when it comes to AI. As we always say, everyone has the same models. So if you type in the same prompt as another person, you're going to get the same results.
Yeah.
And let's, as you said, if it's not just the prompt, what else is there? Are you looking for the perfect prompt? There's really three pieces to the puzzle that you're trying to get through here. One is a system style prompt, who your charm is in case of CharmIQ, who your agent is in other platforms. There's your context, and your context is kind of divided up into two pieces. It's the prompt, the immediate question that you're asking, and then the background, the exposition around that question. So the context is everything that differentiates the problem that you're talking about from a very generic problem. So for example, if you ask, what's the weather today? Just think about that question for a minute. If you ask, what is the weather today? That implies that you know where you are, what day it is, the time of day, etc. So that's super important to know. And think about that with respect to any type of question that you have. We get so used to, with social media and these other things, you just get used to firing off questions or firing off things that you need or asking your agents these things. But the more context you can provide, the more information about the specifics that you need, the better response that you're going to get.
Yeah. I mean, we're going to kind of repeat ourselves a little bit in this podcast because it's so relevant to context. You've said something that flips conventional AI wisdom on its head, that 80% of the work isn't about the prompt writing at all. It's context management, a little bit about what you were talking about. So you broke it down a little bit just now, but let's break it down even further. What does that 80% actually look like in real life as we're prompting or thinking about even asking a simple question about what the weather's like, or maybe more important, deeper work? So what are we doing in this phase of context management and preparing for, just partnering with AI?
That's a great question. I'm going to talk about this in a couple of different ways. If you've ever worked with a consulting firm, then you know that when they come in and they start talking to you, all that they do is they talk to all the different people. They talk to different departments, they talk to you, they talk to everybody. And they take all of that information and then they give you a response. And I want you to think about that, right? Like the consultant just doesn't come in and just say, here's an answer. They spend typically weeks talking to everybody and anyone, gathering, in this case, what we're going to call the context. What is specific about your organization? What's specific about the problems that you have? So that's one side. So if that resonates with you, I hope that that's useful. Again, thinking about how do you bring in a consultant. And I'll kind of pick a middle one here. I'll pick a couple of examples. The one that I always use, which is when you onboard a new employee into your company. Now, in theory, if you're looking for somebody with a specific skill, et cetera, then they're coming in the door with that skill, but they're not immediately useful in your environment on that first day. It usually takes, as I always say, like 6 months before somebody's useful. And why is that? Like, what is the difference between when they come in the first day and when they're the 6 month later day? What is the difference? What have they gained? And again, that's context. Again, it's about what does your business do? How does your business work? What is specific about your business? How do you do it versus other things? And I'm putting this in a business context, but it's true with any conversation. Think about the last time that you've brought a new friend into your friend circle and that person sits down and, people will call them inside jokes, for example, and so forth. But you'll have all of this shared context with your existing friends bringing this new person in. And that new person won't really know what to do, right? They won't know, are you guys being funny? Are you being sarcastic? Like, you have to learn a lot about what's going on. So I think we have all of these experiences in our day to day. I think because of the human interaction, we're just so used to them, and we're so used to the other person. We're used to that look on their face of like, oh, I don't know what's going on. Or like, you see the quizzical look, and we don't have that yet for AI. You don't have the quizzical look. They'll just barrel forward. Sometimes if you ask them to ask a question, they'll ask you a question, but it sometimes seems as though they're asking you the question because you asked them to ask you the question rather than like really needing the answer to that question.
Yes.
So again, I will push you towards the things that we do all the time. You're talking on a new business call with somebody. You can't just start spewing stuff on that call to somebody. You find out who they are, what are their needs, where, like their position within the company, all these different things. So again, we are so used to doing this on the human to human scale. But for whatever reason, once we talk to the machine, we just go in there and we're just like, what's the weather today? And you know what? It'll sometimes give you just the answer without saying, or maybe it will implicitly have a little bit of context. But again, think about all the questions that you ask. So the canonical question that we see all the time that people, at least in demos, will say is like, plan a trip for me. And I would say the last thing on the planet that I would have my AI do is plan a trip for me. Every time that I plan a trip using human beings, it takes me a really long time to get those people ready. So I use, as an example, I love to use Zicasso for travel. They have people all around the world that you can use as travel advisors and trip planners and so forth. And I literally have a massive document that I literally send them in an email before we start talking that says, these are the types of things that I look for in travel. I like to travel at these times of day on these particular airlines. All of these particular preferences about me and the way I like to travel, the types of things I like to do and so forth. And again, this is a thing that I do with another human. And it's the exact same thing is true when you talk with your AIs. Like they need that massive document per situation. And what's more is for you to just type that in every single time you ask a question.
Gosh.
It doesn't work, right?
Yep.
And literally why we built CharmIQ is you need you need documents, you need context in which to put all of this information so that you can bring it when you need it. And because the context window, the amount of information you can give to your AI is limited, you can't just give it everything that you have. You can't just say for every conversation, just put everything you always know in there, because one, it gets confused, and two, it won't fit. So you usually have to spend time thinking about first what context is necessary. You have to manage that context, put it into documents where it makes sense. We do refactoring, which is a common term for software, which is like taking structure and potentially moving it into reusable parts so that you can take those parts and bring them together. So, for example, if I have this document that I use for travel and to specify what I need, if I only need to talk about, for example, flights, then I have a particular section of that document that I could just refactor out and have it as a separate document. And I could just use that. So it's not all the extra information that I have about like what I need if I'm doing cruise travel, for example, which I'll just say my ocean cruises are different than my river cruises. And yes, I am a bit of a finicky SOB when it comes to my travel, but I get exactly what I need and what I want out of my travel.
It's smart. You're saving time. You're collecting information in documents, if you will, that save you so much time, but give so much leverage to the machine to really deliver the results you're looking for. And that in the end saves you a ton of time and probably a lot of headaches.
Yes. And what's been interesting as you look on the internet is everyone is so focused, and they have been focused for the past 3 years on these magic prompts, like 30 prompts that'll make you better at your job. And it's like, wow, if if you could just simply type in that, if again, what's so crazy when you think about it is if you type in that magic prompt and the next person types in that magic prompt, you're roughly going to get the same answer. So why are people selling you magic prompts? They should just sell you magic prompt answers, because
Yes.
again, you're going to get the same answer
Yes.
unless you provide the context. And again, what differentiates your magic prompt from all the rest of the stuff is the context you put in.
Yes.
Again, if I go to my travel advisor and I say like, hey, I want to go to Barbados, like they're just going to be like, okay, I don't know what you want. I'm just going to find like what's cheap and what's middle of the road and so forth. But again, if I give them a massive set of context around, here's how I like to travel. Here are the types of places I like to stay. I like eco-friendly versus non. I don't want large name brand hotels because I don't want to feel like I'm on a business trip. I want bespoke. I want something that has where I can interact with the owners of it. I would love to talk to the people that are there. I'm not just there to like consume the vacation that I'm on. I want to experience it with people.
Yes.
And again, if the magic prompt was like, find me the best vacation in Barbados, like, or something, right? That wouldn't get me the thing that I want. Like I have to specify all my context.
Yeah, I love that. So I want to keep diving deeper into context, this topic, but I do want to bring up, because I've been hearing this a lot lately and I know it means different things, but the new term I've been hearing is context engineering. And I know that that's a little bit different than what we're talking about in context management. So a little sidebar conversation on why should everyday users care about this distinction, because they're not the same thing, right?
So that is a fantastic question. And I will say that I'm going to save half of it for next week's discussion, because we're going to talk about why does everyone keep adding new terms for existing things? Why is prompt engineering a thing? Why is context engineering a thing? Like, what are all these terms? So I'm going to save a bunch of that for next week's discussion.
Okay.
So stay tuned. And if folks have some questions based on this one, but let's talk about it from a very specific standpoint. So right now, if you hear the phrase context engineering,
Yep.
There's two ways in which it's meant today. One is that people were doing prompt engineering and they're like, well, now there's this new thing called context. So it has to be engineering as well. So it must be prompt engineering must become context engineering. And let's just say, again, prompt engineering was never engineering to begin with. It's basically like learn how to talk. And then the second one is context engineering. Again, it's not engineering. It's just like, again, how do you manage this stuff? And that's why we call it context management, which is how do you take all this disparate information and make it make sense and make it available at the time in the place where you need it. But I do want to put a little caveat on there that if we have people who are actually working in this field and do this work, there is actual context engineering that happens. And I'll just talk about that briefly so that, again, this won't matter much to the broader audience, but again, to a very specific audience who do work on AI specific products, context engineering is a thing. And what that is how do you help your user of your product not do a whole lot of work? So in other words, in order to get the best result from an AI, you need to provide it with as much context as possible. And how do you engineer your product such that you have that context? So imagine if I'm a travel site, I don't want somebody to have to write their entire thesis on travel. You would love to break it down into steps. You would love them to, once they've given you things, to see how that information is useful within the product and so forth. And that's on the product management side of context engineering. And on the engineering, the software engineering side of context engineering, you have to figure out how to take all that information and basically make it make sense and make it fit within what's available to the AI. So again, there is lots of code to be written here. There's techniques like retrieval augmented generation. There's knowledge graphs. There's like all these different ways to extract information such that you can put it into the context. And again, that is truly what context engineering is. Like you set up tests and you figure out, if I put this information in, I get these results. But if I put this other information in, I get better results. And there's tests that you run and benchmarks and all this stuff. And again, that is truly what engineering means. But again, just to reset where I was on this whole thing, when most people talk about context engineering, they're talking about it in the same way they're talking about prompt engineering, which is basically they have to type stuff in.
Right. So it is different than what we're talking about in terms of context management, which is like, when I think about context management, it's all the personal information that makes me, right? So when I plan my dream trip to Barbados, my trip might look definitely different than yours. Although I
Totally.
will say I would like to eat at the same restaurants you do because I know you're a foodie. So
Thank
I
you.
would say just let me follow Rob on that restaurant tour. So let's talk about when this goes sideways, when
Mhm.
context goes wrong,
Yeah.
right? So you've mentioned and we've talked about context soup,
Yep.
which that's a problem we've talked about before in previous podcasts. And it's such a vivid image. So for those of you that don't know what context soup is, Rob will explain a little bit about what that is and
Yep.
then you won't forget it. But what happens when context gets too messy?
Mhm.
Or we skip it all together. And we talked about that, just going in and barking orders at our
Yep.
partner machine, the AI, right? So let's talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, this is a great question. So this is all around this whole process of like, how do you get the best result out of your AI? And I would put this in the same bucket of like, how do you maximize the value you get from your employees, for example,
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
or even your family structure? How do you structure your time with your friends and family such that you all maximize like what you get from that engagement? So let's talk a little bit about the context soup. We really like this one. It just came from an analogy, very ratatouille kind of, if you've ever seen the movie, where you just imagine a world in which you put a whole bunch of anything into your soup pot. You may end up with some very interesting flavors. And once those things are in your soup, it is really hard to get those things back out. What I was mentioning earlier is because of the limitations in these AI models, you can't just give it the kitchen sink. You can't just pour everything into that soup because it just won't fit. For one,
Mhm.
like it's like trying to put 5 gallons worth of into a 2 quart pot, right? Like you just can't do it. So that's one side. The second one is again, sometimes, so why things like ChatGPT really kind of irk me is because you don't get to choose your context. They put it
Mm.
into this memory feature, and sure, you can go in there and remove things if you don't want them. But for people who use ChatGPT, the same ChatGPT in the workplace, at home, with family and friends, with other things, you basically have context soup, which
Yes.
is you may have been talking about a work trip and you may also be talking about a personal trip, but when you're trying to do the work questions, you don't want your personal trip to bleed in there because those may have different requirements.
Sure.
And the same thing vice versa. When you're working on your
Yes.
personal trip, you don't want your, like my business hotel should have nothing to do with it. So again, because of this limitation of how much you can put in them, you can't give it the context, enough context for it to know which contexts are the right context to use. So right now it tends to be a manual process. But again, if you use things like ChatGPT, where you're just kind of dumping it into your context soup, you end up with this mishmash of like, you may have been brainstorming on one idea last week, and that somehow kind of gets into your dude's idea about what he should be talking about this week. And it's like, that's not a thing. So this happens. And again, one of the main reasons we built Charm is, and the way we built Charm was specifically a no magic policy. You literally know what context you're putting in because you can go look at it, and we make it part of your process to force you to think about what context you put in there,
Right.
because it's very important right now to not confuse your dude, to not mix the brainstorming ideas you did last week, which literally have nothing to do with the brainstorming ideas that you're doing this week. And sometimes it's interesting to do them both and to take some of the soup you had last week and combine it with the soup you had today, or do them separately and like do all these different combinations to see what kind of insight that you have.
Yeah.
And one other thing to say, just going back to that soup analogy, is once you've started to have this long conversation, you again, especially with things like ChatGPT, you can't go back up there and say like, don't talk about that anymore.
Yeah.
Like you literally can't do that. You
Right.
can like try to force it to, but like once it's in the soup, again, it's really hard to get out. And
Yeah.
again, one of the best parts about CharmIQ, with the way like I can't even work without it anymore, is you pick the context you want to come in and out. And what's more is you have full control over the things that you do. Like if you don't want that thing up in the part of the thing, just like literally delete it. That's not part of the conversation anymore.
Right.
And if you've ever done that, and again, I highly recommend you do it because it's really night and day between like sometimes mediocre and confusing responses that you get with very aligned, very useful responses that you get.
Yes, of course. I've experienced that myself, and I do love the ability to add and remove things and to make worksheets actual documents that I can go back to. So if how to get good at this context management, it's the real job here, right? It's what we should get really good at. So, and we've talked a little bit about this, but I want to dive slightly deeper. So what does it look like to actually get good at it? And what are the skills no one's teaching us that we need to develop these core skills to have a great working relationship with AI, right? And to save us more time. So what are some of those skills that we need to develop, and what does it look like and sound like?
Great. Yeah. So what's really neat about this is I wear a lot of different hats. I wear product hats, development hats, executive hats, podcast hats, etc.
Mm-hmm.
And as such, like I have this diverse set of skills that everyone doesn't have them. And I always forget that. Like we can only see the world through our own eyes. So what I would normally do is I would normally give a very developer centric idea.
Yeah.
Which is we have this notion of refactoring. One of the things that we do in software is we have terms like technical debt. Once you start to build up a certain amount of debt in what you're doing and you see the results are not getting what you want, then you have to pay down that debt, just like your credit card bills. You can't keep charging money to them. And it's the same thing with your context. If you've ever run into the limitation in ChatGPT, for example, where it says like you're out of context and you have to literally pay down that debt and you have to go in there and walk through and you go like, holy crap, when did I talk about that? And what has that been doing to my results? I'll give you that example, which again is the software analogy of like you have technical debt, which is like you have things that you've been buying purchases, but you haven't started paying them off yet. And you're paying interest on those things. And then things like refactoring, which we talked about slightly earlier, which is when you have like lots of context, like you have to think about how do you manage them? Do you break them? What units are useful units to have? So, again, broad strokes, things like I have travel documents that I have work related documents that I have. And within work, I may have different types of the work that I'm doing. I have personal ones and I have to break them down into those separate units. And then sometimes I just need another thing where I'm like, I always kind of have to describe like who I am and how do I work and like, why am I here? And I'll have another document for that. So it's really the realization of the different contexts in which you work, right, and separate them into those individual things. And that's one way to think about like information architecture. Like if you've ever spent time like working with large amounts of documents, you have to typically put them into buckets first and then subdivide the buckets and all those things. And it's the same thing with your context. I would go back to, what's the nice Japanese lady's name that helps you reorganize
Marie Kondo.
Yes. So like think about those kind of structures. She has an approach to the way that you should organize your closet. And I would say that's the exact same thing that you have with the way that you organize your thoughts, the way that you organize your context for working with your LLM. And it's really those kind of ideas. So hopefully by looking at, parallel ideas like, again, organizing your closet, or how do you organize your clothes, or how do you organize your dishes or your day, or all these things, those similar kind of structures are exactly the way that the skills that you need to help manage your LLM.
Yeah, for sure. And I even experienced that myself. Like I'll even tell, when I'm speaking to my AI or to my Charm, I tell it like, I'm 80% on board with this idea and feeling right, but there's 20% of me or 30% of me feeling, I need to be more conservative. So even giving it those kind of parameters to kind of, because I'm a different person, when I'm thinking about work or strategy at work, and then how I'm parenting, right? Or maybe how I'm, spending my vacation, because I'm certainly not going to take my kids on a work trip. So those things are important to pull out. So this 80-20 reality, and in terms of exposure to the limitations, like the current AI tools, we talk a lot about ChatGPT and how it's an app and how it's like that one like long chat thing that we can't go back and take things out of. So it exposes some of the limitations of the current AI tools. So as people that are listening, what should people be looking for when choosing platforms, and how is there a hybrid approach? Is it all in? Talk a little bit about this.
Yeah, so that's I will say, a fantastic question, because tools are not currently delimited by these things. You don't really, other than, again, a platform like ours, like I don't know of any other ones. Everyone wants to make it easy. And if there's one thing that I think we should all really, really push against right now is easy. Because the easier everything means the less control we have. And it means, honestly, the less value we can provide in those contexts. So if everything could be done, and again, I encourage you to think long and hard about this. If you can do your job with these magic prompts, like if the world becomes easy, then what value do you provide? And
Right.
because again, you don't need to be the one that's entering those prompts. We could literally just create another prompt that creates the prompts that do those things, right?
Right.
So this, and I'm not saying to create moats around or to gatekeep your own information. Like that's the exact opposite of what we're saying here. But again, you were hired in an organization because you have skills and you have value and you bring those. And again, your organization has particular value that you have. Again, your customers are yours and are not with your competitors for specific reasons. And these are all the things that differentiate you and provide the context and the value that you have. And again, I really encourage everyone to think about that. So and really, and I've said this many times now, like push back against your vendors. You don't want it easier. You truly do not, because as easier it gets, the less control you have, the less value you as a human and an individual and somebody that has thoughts and ideas and experiences, the less you can provide those to these environments. So again, I really struggle with this because there aren't differentiation in tools. You look at things like, Notebook LM, you look at Anthropic's, what they provide and so forth, and they're all just chatbots and they're all just chat windows and you can look at previous chats. And I'm just like, where's the me in there? Like, where's the value? And again, thinking about, this is again, why we created CharmIQ was like, I realized 2.5 years ago that like you have to be able to think about these things, and like developers, you have to be able to refactor your context and break it into chunks. And what I didn't mention earlier that I want to mention here is don't forget that even if you don't know what skills you should have or what methodology to use to help you with your context, ask your agents to help you with that. You can just say like, hey, like, how do I think about these things? How should, for this problem, for this environment, for this customer, for this situation, how should I be thinking about what they're doing? And you will have an amazing conversation, which you can then just use another agent, just basically say, hey, turn this into my context. And that's what we do in Charm all the time is you have this really rich and engaging conversation. And really one of the last steps that you do is like, help me turn this into a context for future engagements, for future ideas. And so that's so important.
Yeah. And that's the beautiful part of CharmIQ. And that's what's really helped me distinguish the professional me from the mom me, from the, whatever journey I'm on, whatever things I'm focused on, turning those conversations into context documents and using those in future strategies is invaluable, right? As I'm consulting and coaching different CEOs or different C-suite groups, right?
Totally.
Because
each customer has their own different needs. They cannot be the same context document.
No.
And I'll just say it, and sorry to cut in, but just, again, I really want people to think about this. You want your context management tool to be easier for you to use, but you don't want your chatbot to be like easier to use. Like you don't want this, because again, think about, again, you go into your next job. It takes you months to like for that company to know who you are and for you to know who they are. If you somehow think you're just going to sit down at your chatbot and just like, it's going to somehow know you, like, what does that mean? Like, really think about that.
Yeah. And I think for the important piece and what I always talk to people about is never losing that human element. I am Chelene. I have certain characteristics. I have certain things that I bring to the table. It's my thumbprint. It's my personality. It's all my strengths and weaknesses rolled into one. The human element in engaging and partnering with AI is still so important, and it will set you apart from everyone else that's simply prompting. Right? You don't want to look and sound like everyone else in the room. And as long as you can bring that context, your goals, your strategy, your positive and negative things to the table, in utilizing AI, that's where you win. That's where you set yourself apart. And that's going to be so important in the future. Right? And
yes, it is. And I know that there are people out there that don't want to stick out in a crowd. They don't want to because there's sometimes that fear, right? That fear of judgment, that fear of whatever. And I would just say that this is a time to work on that skill, because it's going to be really hard to differentiate when you're in a workplace and you're performing a function. Who you are comes through your result, right? And as we become more AI enabled and more AI supported, you're just going to be clicking yes a lot, right? Like, and where does the you come through? So again, I understand that there will be people that are really reticent to bring themselves forward. And I think that, again, as we are all together in this interesting time of change, like, we need to demand more of our products so that you can, because again, as I just said a moment ago, the way that normally you shine in a case where you're reticent to bring yourself forward is through your work, right? Through the things that you do. But again, if you're just clicking yes, if you're not getting or yes and no, and you're not getting the ability to express yourself, your voice needs to be heard. Like, we need to hear from you. We need to understand your concerns and your constraints and your worries. And how do we allow these tools to express your voice while still allowing you to be comfortable in the fact that you may not be able to express yourself in the similar way. So again, Chelene says it every time. I try to say it as much as I can. Like, we can't lose the human side of this. We're all unique. This is why this world is so damned exciting and interesting, is because we all have different ideas. We all have different experiences, and we can't allow those to be normalized. So sorry to throw that at the end of this whole thing. But again, I want to always be receptive to the people who may not want to be worried about standing up, may be worried. And again, let's hear your voice. Let's try to get that incorporated. Like, how do we hear you?
Yeah, absolutely. So, and I think I have a good fun exercise for our listeners. So before we close, I do want to leave you with one simple challenge that you can try today. It's called the 5-line context snapshot. And it's one of the fastest ways to get dramatically better results from AI that you're partnered with. So before you ask AI anything, before you bark orders at it, I want you to jot down these 5 quick lines and answer them. Who are you? What are you trying to do? Who is it for? And any must-haves or deal breakers. And lastly, the tone or style that you want. Is it personal? Is it professional? Even think about certain writers or brands that you really want to kind of represent or have in your style. And then I want you to paste the prompt of what you're doing, whether it's a marketing campaign or a new exercise regime or negotiating a contract, right? Then put in the prompt below. Then what I want you to do is look at those results. How are they different than previous, right? When you just ask the same question without those 5 lines. And compare. I guarantee you will see an instant difference, because that's the power of context management. It's the power of giving the machine your thumbprint of who you are and what's important to you. And we made it easy for you. You can easily download this free printable snapshot from the link in our show notes. I want you to try it. It takes literally 2 to 3 minutes, and you don't even have to type it. Again, you can just speak it into the prompt. Speak to the AI, build that relationship like you would a human. So give it a try and tag us when you do and let us know. Did it work? Did you see a difference? Was there more you there in that exercise? So
fantastic.
Yeah. So Rob, this totally reframes how we think about AI and how we partner with AI. We don't want to lose that human element. We want to bring that to the table. So it's not about chasing the perfect prompt. It's about building the perfect context. And just think about that context as your thumbprint, you. If you've been frustrated with inconsistent, shallow, or irrelevant answers, now you know why. It's not the machine. You've been focused on the 20% while the 80% has been quietly calling the shots. And that's what continuing the conversation is all about. Real talk and practical solutions and tools in making your AI your collaborator and not just your calculator. So stay curious and stay contextual. And always, we'll see you next week when we continue the conversation. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.